Reverse order as far as today with reading the scriptures. Okay, I'm just going to throw you all a little curveball.
But it was my turn last week.
Okay, so anyway, what we're going to do, this is our, first thing I have to mention is, by the way, we've been asked, it's been an annual thing now that in the summertime, Scott, Deborah, Robin, and they get together and they have, is it Awana or another?
No, it's a kids program.
It's a kids program. And so a Wednesday in the summertime, basically June, July, they request each from the Bible Life classes, 3 or 4 people to kind of participate, and each class takes a week. So, I mean, one of the weeks, one of the Wednesdays of the week. And so right now we have, there's June 18, which I'd kind of rather not do, but July the 2nd was already taken, so we have the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th of July. Is there anybody that could make themselves available for an hour and a half, basically 6:30 roughly to about 7, close to 8 o'clock roughly, that one of those Wednesdays? Anybody feel like volunteering?
I could do that.
I'll just put it out there today. I'll email it as part of the information so you can make the decision then. But probably we'll do something like July the 9th or 16th, or let me know if there's any dates that are just totally,
They had
issues.
taken, I think they had taken more than the.
Okay, we'll find out. All right, Justin, welcome back. All right, and so we are at our 11th lesson in the study of John. It's going a little slower than I had planned, but I hope it's enriching still and that it is rewarding in our study. Last week, as you know, it handed out that pop quiz, and it was really, I think it wasn't something that caught you off guard, but I think it was pretty neat thing to go through and realize the names and all that are titled to Christ, how they described him, just in that one chapter. It was pretty amazing. It was like 25 or 26 names that you could kind of easily come up with. So next, you looked at in your Bibles and you saw, oh, really, there are maps in my Bible where you could look up, see where Jesus walked and so forth. And so you got the idea of how we find out where Jesus went from Judea all the way up into places in Galilee, Cana, and so forth. And it's good that you go ahead and look at those. So just so you have, an understanding. I mean, they walked these routes there. There was no cars and all. So it was these treks were long and arduous at times. All right, so we started studying John's narrative about the wedding in Cana, and I kind of asked you as you read it, what sort of hit you? And I think the most jarring thing was just simply the way that Jesus addressed his mother, kind of like, what was this thing? Woman. And it was like, isn't that kind of like harsh there, But we kind of went through that, and it's really more like an idea of sort of like madam, you kind of might put in our vernacular. It wasn't meant to be disrespectful or anything, but the point was he wanted to establish separation involved here. And the idea was that you are my mother, and I recognize that you have your light on it. And so the idea was to establish separation. It's not that he was denying that she was his mother, of course, but that he now had a higher calling in order to do something, in order to save the world. She was now a sinner. I mean, and she was always a sinner, but he was now going to be her savior. That's how she had to look at him on, as basically the Lamb of God, as John the Baptist had addressed him as. So there was that idea. That's why you might say he didn't say, well, Mom, It was more like he had to address her as something else, because it was going to be a different relationship inside this. So,
but you also have to think about it that she knew that he was special.
Well,
he knew that he could do something.
Well, I mean, when we get to the wedding thing, well, hang on to that. Okay, just hold on to that thought.
Well, for her to even come in and talk to him about it.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. That she would actually, look to him for a solution. Correct. Okay. So, but the idea was that Jesus is not going to be looking for advice for anybody. He's not going to be manipulated or, corralled into doing something like this. And you can see this all throughout his ministry. Nobody, not even his mother, has an inside track into the Trinity and so forth like that, into some special relationship. Everybody comes in on the same level, you might say. So that's why, in essence, it is this sort of idea. It sounds a little rough, the idea of madam or woman, but he has to establish this relationship now, because it's clear this is now, his mission is now ongoing. All right, we also figured probably Joseph, Jesus's earthly father, would have died sometime between maybe his 12th and 20th birthdays, probably in that sense, because it's likely Jesus would have taken over being kind of the family provider in a sense for Mary and all. Joseph would have taught Jesus how to be a carpenter, and so he would have taken those skills and have basically made a living that way and supported the family. So we can see that, she had an intense connection to him, not only just in terms of the idea of just being her son, but also her caretaker, the one who really provided for the family. So it was a pretty special relationship that they had. And the other thing that we saw in the observations was that there is no, in terms of this particular narrative, there is no spiritual discourse or lesson going on. Did you notice that? That there's not like, this is what this means, so to speak. It's just the miracle happens, and we're left with, what does this mean? But I think as we go through it today, hopefully we'll get to the point where we can see, we kind of know what it means. We can see it, but it's not overtly described. And so we'll go through that to some degree, and hopefully we'll finish that. So, let's move on here. And but the other thing about it is it was really kind of a semi-public miracle. Remember, many others he is going to do just out front, in front of a crowd. They can see the whole thing. This one was a lot more, fewer people saw this. I mean, it was like a semi-private, right? So only a few really saw this. It wasn't open to everybody. It had quite limited viewing. Some people, we love the idea of Jesus turning water into wine. Some Christians get upset and they wish he turned wine into water, But we have to go with what the scripture says and appreciate that. So if we get some time, we'll look at some of the passages about wine on this side over here that we'll see what the connection is with wine in the scriptures. All right, we ended last week with the idea that, remember, just like with Peter, remember when he rebuked Jesus because when Jesus said he's going to be tortured, go to the cross and so forth, and be resurrected, and Peter said, that will never happen to you, right? And Jesus basically turns away from him and he said, get behind me, Satan. So it's a very picturesque scene of what he's saying. You defy what I'm trying to do, and you're acting as Satan in this manner. So Jesus was rebuking Peter in this sense, and likewise, just in that same way, as we look in this story, we'll look at what this story, Jesus is doing a minor rebuke of his own mother in this sense of what he is trying to get across to her. All right, let's go ahead and get into the story. I'm going to ask Veronica if you could read John 2, 1 through 5.
On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to finish off. Oh, go ahead, Ebony.
Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, he did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and the people have drunk freely than the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This, the first of the signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, he manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Finish it. Go ahead, Justin, that last sentence there.
After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days.
Okay, thank you. So this now, again, we've read the narrative, the story, basically. Anything else that just sort of jumps out, Chacha, that we haven't already kind of made comment on?
Well, it's interesting because he's telling her, I'm not going to do anything, and she just kind of disregards it.
That's a good point.
Do what he says.
Okay, right, okay.
But
So
he really didn't say, he just says my hour hasn't come yet. It didn't say, I'm not gonna do it.
No,
That's correct.
There's a big difference between
You're quite right. There is a big difference, an outright rejection of doing something, correct. Okay, but ladies, if you would, just kind of put yourself in Mary's shoes, just to try and experience what she was going through at this time, because here you had, of course, as we just mentioned before, this was her own son that she was now kind of relying on. She had, suckled him at her and brought her through toddler and childhood years, tended to him when he scraped his knees and taught him things and all. And so now, of course, he's been a grown man, but this would be difficult for her because this break that's going on, because she had relied on him so much, but now the support that she once had, Jesus was going to have to leave his family life and go to his public ministry life, so she was not going to have that support. Yes?
Do you think it doesn't matter, but this was maybe almost the first time he did woman instead of mom?
I think so. I'm just thinking because he had just started his ministry like the week or so before. I don't know for certain, Bill, but I think that would be the case. That's my personal opinion. I think it probably would have been a little shocking to her, maybe, in that sense. But the idea was that this was part of Simeon's words. Remember the temple when he was born, at the time when he was being circumcised. It was like, go ahead and read, Nolan, if you're next. Luke 2:34-35.
And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that thoughts from my many hearts may be revealed.
Yeah, so a sword through your own soul is the idea that, it's going to be piercing for you. It's going to be especially difficult for you because you're going to see your son, not only you're going to break this up essentially, but also later on, as we read last week, when he was on the cross, dying, remember, he basically provided for her care, taking into account the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, and basically he turned her care over to John, the writer of this particular gospel, and she would stay with him and be at his care for the rest of her life, basically her natural life. So it was just part of this thing where, this is going to be challenging for you, Mary. So we take that into heart that this was Mary, which is the kind of special kind of person that would have to go through this. But okay, we get on with the story. So now we're really moving on. And Jesus, what does Jesus say to her? What does this have to do with me? Okay. So this is where he's saying, it's really kind of a gentle rebuke. He's sort of asking, why do you involve me in this matter? Right? And it just seems kind of like, if I was there, I would have said, hey, Vinny's liquor store is open down the street. Send the servants there to go get it, or something of that nature, okay? Or it's just not my problem to deal with. Have you ever been at work? It used to be these signs, a mistake on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Those kinds of, I'm not here to make up for your foolishness, kind of a thing. So, in one sense, it almost seems like his mother is a lot more caring than Jesus himself about the situation, right? But again, Jesus is going to act out only as we learn in John chapter 5. He is only going to do basically these acts, special acts, according to how his Father directs him, right? God the Father. So he is not going to just do things right off the cuff, so to speak, and I'm going to change plans here. So it all has to be according to plan, you might say. So it almost seems kind of petty to you. I mean, Jesus is going to do all these healings, exorcisms, and feed 5,000, and you can't help these kids out, But again, it all has to be to the glory of God and the way that he wants it done and the way that gives him the glory and so forth. So,
wasn't Mary related to these people?
we don't know. We know that she knew them. It would be reasonable to assume. There is no passage that says there was a family connection. But undoubtedly, I think just her presence there means that she knew them, for sure. Okay, so Jesus is not a man pleaser or a woman pleaser by any sense. He's not going to try and get the favor of anybody, as we've seen in the scriptures previously. So he's only going to do what the Father tells him to do, okay? He's not like, an I Dream of Jeannie type of person, and there we go, according to what somebody wants. He's going to do what is best for the glory of God. So, and most of the miracles, it's interesting, they're done on the one-to-one level. And there's only about 35 miracles of Jesus in the scriptures. And all of them, other than a couple, you have the feeding of the 5,000, and so forth like that, the very mass type of a thing. but nowhere does he do a mass healing, okay, of any sense like this. So it's all, people come up to him, they touch the hem of his garment, or in some sense, or he does it one-on-one, or a small group, and a bunch of lepers and so forth like that. So it's not a mass thing that he does. It's much more personal. Or individual, yeah, precisely. Or the fish and the nets and so forth like that, the fishermen and so forth. So, but the point is that the focus now must be on Jesus' ministry, not on what Mary wants. And he seemingly puts this distance between him and his mother, and that needs to be seen in light of the cross. So he has this point of being, his hour has not yet come. Okay, that is an important expression that Jesus will use frequently, a number of times, certainly in this gospel, I think as well as some of the others. Let's look at how he uses it. John 7:30, Marianne?
So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come.
Right, thank you. And Wendy, 8:20?
These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come.
And Rita.
There is no 1730.
You serious?
Very.
Well, whatever I meant. Thank you. Okay. I meant to say, when Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, oh, there is no 17? Okay.
Yeah.
17:3. Must be 17:3 perhaps. Is that what it is?
Nope, eternal life that they knew. Jesus spoke these words, it's the first one.
When Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. So the idea is the hour is going to represent his upcoming death, his resurrection, and his exaltation. That's what his whole point in life has now been going for, and it is now very close to this period of time, and he doesn't want anything distracting it, basically, you might say. All right.
We have
So-
to find this.
So then his mother just simply says to the servants, right, do whatever he tells you. And I think the idea is there, you might think, Mary's like, well, he's already on the hook, so I'm just going to leave it up to him.
Oh, here it is. Yep.
Right.
It's 17:1.
17:1. How did I get 30 up there?
Yep, no.
Oh, sorry, Rita. Okay. All right. So you have the wrong idea if we think Mary was kind of manipulating Jesus in this sense. I mean, she wanted him to do something in that sense, but she is not going to be successful with any kind of manipulation. But I think because of the conversation that goes there, there's a number of, let's say, probably a large part, many Catholics who would think because of this kind of, situation we see here, that she's getting him to do something. So it's easy to kind of come up with the idea, well, you want to get to Jesus for him to do something for you, who do you go through? Mary, right? I mean, it's just sort of a simple connection. She got him to do the business, fix the situation here. So she's considered the sort of mediatrix or whatever that is. And that's, of course.
Are there any other scriptures that point in that direction? I mean, that was a good point.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And that maybe sometimes that angle is used.
Yeah.
Is there any other scriptures you can think of?
I can't
Maybe
think of
that's where they draw that conclusion.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Yeah, I
You're
can
talking about the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I was just saying that.
Yeah, because they like to pray to her.
Exactly, too. Yeah, I can't think of any right now, Lee.
Yeah. Well, somebody told me one time that Mary gives God a woman's perspective.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
So, and that of course is a heresy that we can go through Mary, his mother, to get to Jesus. So, but the idea is that there's a sense in which Mary's response, even though it's not explicitly stated, but I think it's kind of baked into what she says, and that is she is now exercising faith. And so her attitude has actually changed. We don't see it in simply the black and white letters that we have, but I think just from what we understand about her nature and about what is going to happen, that there's a turning point in here, and she is going to trust, she's going to trust his resourcefulness to do whatever it is. And even no matter the outcome, even if it isn't what she wants, so be it, kind of a thing. And so I think she did not get a coffee cup from somebody this morning that says this, okay? She did not get anybody, expect a miracle, okay? She had never seen Jesus do a miracle. Jesus had never done a miracle before. This is his first miracle, you might say, okay? So this would have surprised her, of course, as to what went on. What did she think he was going to do? I don't know, it's kind of, we don't know.
Maybe
The
she was
point-
thinking he was going to take some of his disciples and actually go to the liquor store.
Go down to Vinny's or something of that nature. Yeah, we don't know. So
Well,
anyway,
what about the time when Jesus was at the temple when he was 12?
yes,
And he told her he was going about his father's
yes,
business.
yes.
So Mary knew there was something back then.
Well, absolutely. I mean, all through at Jesus' birth, of course, the shepherds and all that, and the wise men come in eventually. Oh, there was certainly events around him that she knew this was somebody that was special, different. That which she probably had heard something about. These are connections to the Messiah, but I don't think she would have put everything together.
Well, didn't Gabriel tell her? You're gonna have a son of God?
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Will
you. Okay, we're
save
not going to go there just because
his
of the
people
time.
from his sins.
But you're right. You can read in Luke chapter 1 or 2 about Gabriel visiting her and so forth and all.
So it would not be all that far off for her to go to him.
Correct. But he had never done a miracle. Okay? And it had been 30, he was now approximately 30 years old since the time of some of these happening. So that's a long time past, and I don't know what the expectations were. But at any rate, she is exercising faith, and Jesus will sometimes, I think, we'll find in certain healings or situations, he will go ahead and just sort of withhold doing something for a period of time and allow faith to just kind of precipitate in a person so that they sort of exercise something that shows what they truly believe. But he'll hold off doing it to allow it to come to the surface. We think, for instance, of the Syrophoenician woman in the book of Matthew, where a woman came to Jesus and desperate because her daughter was demon-possessed, and Jesus, so she's begging him to help her. And what does he say to her? I've only come to the lost sheep of Israel. And she says to him, but even the dogs eat the crumbs off the master's table. So the idea there, and Jesus says, go your way. Your faith has healed your daughter. So the idea was he wanted that faith to be precipitated, or it had to be expressed, you might say. And so I think this is the same way in this situation. He would hold it back until there was sort of a sense of faith coming through. And I think that's what's happening here. Okay, we're going to continue on. That's all I'm going to say about that particular aspect. But it says there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. So John now adds his particular cultural and religious commentary to prep us for what is about to happen. This has a direct connection to what the meaning of the whole turning the water into wine is going to be. It's this Jewish rite of purification. These jars are used for this purpose, and Jesus is going to use them for a completely other purpose, okay? So, the 6 stone water jars at the wedding. So, we're told this because it's the amount that is involved here, okay? We're later on going to get to, so this is the quantity. We will soon get to the quality, but right now it's simply the quantity of the water that's going to be converted, the amount of mass involved here, okay? So, as we said, a Jewish wedding feast could last for up to a week, okay, in terms of the celebratory period there. So they're going to need a lot of, wine and things like that. So, but they ran out, we don't know why, and so forth. So, but at any rate, these jars were there for basically washing of hands, for cleaning purposes and so forth. So it was just to get clean, right? It was a Jewish rite of purification, John says. So the other thing to comment is that they're stone, okay, which is pretty good because they're not earthenware. They were not made of, clay. So because clay, eventually the stuff's going to leak into the fluid that's in there and so forth. So stone would be a lot more impervious and would be a lot cleaner to use. So stone was really superior. And what I'm saying is that, it wasn't a massive 2-liter bottles that are going to be used here. This is going to be 6 large stone jars, water bottles.
To every person, there's an idea of how full is full. And it says fill it to the brim.
Yes.
So, he did not leave any thought in their head, well, how full does he want us to fill?
Very good, Peggy. So our next verse is precisely, Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, and they filled them, what? to the brim. So this is quite telling there that there's no big air gaps in there. They just poured them, and you can imagine doing it yourself. You're just pouring water into it just to fill them up. And but it does seem like all of a sudden there is this reversal. Jesus sort of flip-flopped from what he said. He didn't seem to want to have anything to do with it, but now he's going to exercise this miracle that is going to be, I'm not going to say the opposite, but at first it just seems like he wasn't caring to get involved, and now all of a sudden he's engaged, right? So, but it does make me wonder, okay, in my opinion, I see this as guidance from the Father through the Holy Spirit directing Jesus, now that Mary has exercised her faith, to do this miracle, okay? It's going to be for the glory of God, and it's going to be so that his disciples can now witness something that they hadn't ever seen before. But it does make you curious, what were the original wine stuff used? What did they originally store them in? Were they wine skins or something? But it just adds to you the fact that they were water jars is important, because let's say he had used existing wine flasks or casks or kegs or whatever it is, then what might you assume?
It could have already been there.
It could have already been there, right? The fact that these are now water jars designated for that use, it made it so there would be no contesting. This was beyond refutation that this was a miracle, and it's outright. There was no confusion.
You just wonder what the servants were thinking. What is the water going to have?
Boy, indeed, yes, indeed. So this is going to be a miracle of transformation. That's the sign, and it wants to symbolize, basically, Old Testament purification of the law, basically coming into grace. That's what we're going to get at in just a bit here. But it does make you wonder, how much? Yes.
Do you think that they were upset that the thing that's meant to clean and so pure, like now is tainted because it's full of wine? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, like whoever had
whoever set them up. Hey, you're taking my
like that's supposed to clean my hands, right? I mean,
well, good question. I think, but let me just ask you, or let me throw this out there. It makes you wonder how many servants were there, right? I mean, just the idea, how many were there?
Those must have been heavy jars.
Okay.
Yeah,
What they've done, they were very heavy.
And then when you add the water to it.
Where did they go to get the water?
20 gallons.
Okay.
I have no idea plumbing.
Yeah, exactly.
How long
They
did that
have to go
take?
down to the creek or something to get.
They got like 120 gallons of.
Yes. Yeah, I think a total it was like 180, something like that. Was there water already in the jars to a certain extent, or did they have to get they completely empty? How long did this process take? Remember, you're there in real time, basically. It would have taken some time, right? So you're just wondering, you're scratching your head. What's he going to do with these? Is he going to serve water rather than wine and just try and pull the cover over? Kind of like. So anyway, up to this point, the quantity of the wine was in view. Following this, it'll be the quality. And sometimes the Lord just provides things in just simply the exact amount needed. But at other times he does it overwhelming, supernumerary type of a thing where it's beyond what is needed. Your cup runneth over. You saw that in the loaves and fishes and so forth like that, where he's going to create an immense amount beyond what is needed. But sometimes he uses just the exact. I think in this case it would have been beyond what they really needed, just to show the extravagance of God. His grace and all. So he said, of course, fill them to the brim. And so there must be no question when they put in water. It's kind of like, do you remember Jesus was buried in whose tomb? Joseph of Arimathea, right? Had anybody else been buried in there before? No. That was important. Why? There must be no refutation that this person who rose from the dead could only be Christ himself. No one else had ever been buried in that tomb. So that's why. Basically, we have, so to speak, a virgin tomb, you might say. All right. So he looked, and in verse 8 he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. Okay, this is when, of course, the transformation takes place, the water being turned into wine. And believe me, this is beyond our comprehension. I decided to kind of look up what is the composition of wine. Okay, what is the composition of water?
H2O.
H2O, right? 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. I thought I'd be Mr. Smarty Pants. Okay, what's in wine? It is phenomenally complex. I mean, you have flavonoids and all these other kinds of proteins.
Not back then, though.
Pardon?
Not back then. It was probably just
Well, that nobody.
fermented grape juice.
But see, exactly, you know, we take something that we assume, whether it even was grape juice, whatever it would be, it's totally different than water. I mean,
yeah.
water would be in there. But I mean, to transform water into wine, you're talking about the energy required if we were to try and do it, something like that. I mean, we're talking about thermonuclear explosions, that kind of stuff, you know, to
You
drive
couldn't do it.
protein.
I don't know what you
But
did.
even to that point, like they've been making like special types of beers in Mesopotamia since before this,
Yes.
like this time. So I would say probably these wines were probably pretty good wines.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not, but I'm saying is that for now we can appreciate, let's say in our day and age, we know, we recognize what has taken place here, the change from water to wine. It's simply an impossibility for us to do. You think of all the people of the medieval alchemists who tried to turn lead into gold and stuff like that. You know, it is impossible. It's not something that we can do. You know, we might be able to make, you know, atomic bombs that things will go ahead and decay and you get isotopes and all that kind of stuff, we know. But nothing basically changes itself from water to wine, nothing like this. I don't disagree that they had good wines and stuff. I don't think that they maybe could quite appreciate it from our point of view, our vantage point, now that we have all this science behind and we see what is involved in this idea between water and wine, that the differences are so vast that I don't think anybody could quite appreciate it. It reminded me of last week in Aaron's sermon, and it was from Psalm 29, and it said something like, I'm rephrase it, that wonder inspires worship, is what the way I captured it, okay? Wonder inspires worship. And to them, of course, you know, it did inspire worship, but to us, it ought to be all the more, because now we have an idea of even the differences between water and wine, and ought to just strike us and slap us on the head and think, this is omnipotence, you might, you know. And beyond that, also, well, we'll get into it a little bit later, but the idea that when the bridegroom tasted it, or when the master of the feast tasted it, and all, this is the best wine. You've held off, you know, the best wine till now. Nobody ever does that. And the idea was that for God to have created a wine like that, He also had to know what human taste buds were like, you know. And so, I mean, it's just incredible. So if you think of all the integration of all the aspects of a miracle, it's beyond earth.
I think another important point about wine is it was such a process.
Yeah.
I mean, because you got to get the grapes, you got to stomp
You know.
them, it's got to ferment, you know, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I think that'd be connecting to your point, Justin, as far as, you know, it has a process you have to go through, and you could make some good wines, but this was nothing like any wine they had ever had. But you're right. Maybe that's sort of like the immediacy of it may have taken more of their notice rather than the chemical amazement of it, you could say.
It takes it says here, it takes a few days to several weeks for fermentation to even take place.
Yeah, and we figure, you know, the longer the
I don't know if they had sugar those days, but
Right.
used honey to
Right.
some and some.
and we don't know as far as you know, but our vantage point is that the longer the fermentation, basically, the better the wine.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the stronger the wine,
Stronger.
not necessarily.
It gets sour if you get it too soon. My mom used to make wine.
Okay. Okay.
Like, was it during the winter and like grapes weren't even in season?
Well, you know,
HEB grapes?
You got Vinny's. Right. Okay. So, but the idea also in this particular miracle, what's different is that He does not, you know, speak to it to say, water be wine or something like that, right? It's a silent miracle. It happens there. Nobody is able to actually see it with their eyes to sort of see it turn, but the idea is there that it happens, and it is a miracle by simply Him saying, do this, but He never, you know, outwardly speaks of what the miracle that He is.
It's nice that He's doing it for His mom, though, because you think about it, this is His first miracle. Who did He reveal Himself to first? And He's not doing a miracle for any other reason except for to reveal Himself, to reveal His glory. He chose His mom first to say, let me blow your mind. Let you in on it first.
Well, I would be careful to say He did it for His mom.
Yeah, well, I mean, not for His mom, but it happened.
It happened
His mom.
associated
Right.
with His mom. I think that's pretty cool too.
Right, and obviously the disciples were there too. But
Yeah.
it doesn't indicate like He was doing it for the servants or to show the servants, reveal Himself to the servants.
Yeah. I think, that's well said. What's interesting is that, as we will find out, though, what's going to happen is that he's going to be more estranged from his family. Interestingly enough, because there could be a couple of instances where they're like, hey, Jesus, you're gone crazy, So, but it's interesting. But I think it's a great honoring.
But now
so to
she's
speak.
seen that, so
She has seen-
she
yeah.
can understand why
Yeah.
separation is happening.
That's exactly right. So, in verse 9, when the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, didn't know where it came from, the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, right? What happens when you serve the good wine first?
They get drunk and they don't.
They get drunk or inebriated or a little bit giddy. It dulls the palate now that you've already tasted this stuff. So now, after that's all good, then you bring out the cheap stuff. The $2 chuck, the gallo, the ripple, and so forth like that. So,
How do you know about all these now?
how do I know about them? Right. Yeah. So the idea there is that you reduce the cost of your wedding. Nobody's really caring about the the quality of wine at this point. But they say, but you have kept the good wine until now. So again, it's important to realize Jesus did not turn water into grape juice, right? He turned it into wine. Pardon me. Perhaps the master of the feast, maybe he was oblivious. He just doesn't seem to understand that the wine was this shortage. He makes no hint of, where did you get this? Where did this show up, but then he talks about being the finest wine that they've tasted. And the idea there is also the feast master guy, he would have brought in unbiased opinion to it. So I'm assuming he did not know where this wine came from, okay? They just brought it to him, right? Mm-hmm. So he had no concept where it came from. But it was an unbiased opinion, an objective opinion to all of a sudden serve it, and he got to basically taste it, and he realized this was the best wine he had ever functionally tasted. So the point is there, it wasn't like somebody had a biased opinion who, hey, I'm on Jesus' team, so I'll say this is good wine, when it really isn't. But this was somebody who knew his wines. Okay, he probably had his own business, catering weddings and so forth, or something like that. I don't know, but it makes sense. All right, so does it seem like Jesus ever got the credit he deserved?
Well, to some people.
Yeah.
Only those servants.
Hopefully it did, and it eventually spread.
Well, eventually, of course, it gets in the story and so forth. But so at that immediate point there, it doesn't seem like Jesus got the credit.
Verse 11 says he gets the credit.
Say that again.
Verse 11 says he gets the credit.
Okay. All right, but the point is, at the party,
wedding,
the main
yeah.
wedding thing, okay?
Well, even Mary didn't come back and say, good job.
Right. Right, exactly right. And it's not like telling people, don't tell anybody that I did this, so to speak. But word gets around, right? I mean, they're going to eventually find out what had happened. And this, it says, in verse 11, this is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So the narrative is closed by mentioning Cana. Remember, we started verse 1 basically we're starting in Cana, the wedding in Cana. And now it basically ends the whole story with this was the first signs Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory. So we talked about signs. John calls Jesus' miracles signs. We chatted about this before last week. What's the difference between a sign and a miracle?
Well, is a sign pointing to something?
A sign points to something. Yes, it's the miracle. Why was the miracle done? It gives a purpose to the miracle. So you can do a miracle without having any particular point to it. But he calls it a sign because there's a purpose to it, and he wants to address why did he do this. Okay.
Gives you a direction.
Say that again.
Sign tells you the direction.
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
where
It points to something, right? Yep.
Which is always pointing to him.
Right. And it's interesting because there are a number of times when, for instance, the Pharisees or others will say, give us a sign. Show us a sign that you are who you are, basically, right? Does Jesus ever give them a sign?
No.
No, he never does. He never will. Because he's not going to be manipulated by
Because he
people.
already had given signs,
He had-
and they did not.
They didn't believe that, right?
Believe those signs,
Exactly.
so why would he do?
A very good point, right. He did not. He would never do some, a personal,
like a
magic
dare.
show for somebody about something,
If
right?
anybody did it now, they would open up a business. I'll come to your wedding and change all your water?
Well, exactly right. I
Like
think
the water business.
Sure,
But-
exactly right. Yeah, Jesus, we can get him. Think of Peter and fishing or something like that. Yeah, exactly right. So there's no explanation to interpret the sign in the narrative. So well, we're going to make some rational explanations here. But the point is that wine is frequently mentioned in the scriptures. Many times it is mentioned in a number of different ways. It has considerations and condemnations, warnings and condemnations for drunkenness. Look at Ephesians 5:18. Would you have that, Rebecca? Ephesians 5:18. Jason, be ready with that one.
While we're pulling that up, I guess. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to
Debauchery.
Instead be filled with the Spirit.
Garrett?
I was just gonna go back and ask about the servants and their
Oh.
obedience, and just point out, they were told to follow the
And then they
instructions, and they
orders.
follow
Yeah,
them.
that's
So-
true. Yeah, Mary said, "You do what he said."
And then they did it.
Or
They
you're
didn't.
gonna get
They
it.
didn't.
Right.
There's no showing that they asked questions. Or,
Yeah, yeah.
And the fact that they took it to
Never
the,
gonna ask questions. They weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
plus they took it to the master guy, and like if it had been something terrible, he probably would have reprimanded him or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, why are you bringing me this crap?
Right. Okay, so you read about do not be drunk with wine. That is debauchery. Jason, next one, 1 Timothy 5:23.
No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent illness.
Okay, so first you read Rebecca and was like, don't get drunk. Jason is like, well, go ahead and use a little wine for your stomach. So there's dual use of this thing there. We have to be careful and balance it, right? The next point, but the mainstays of Israelite agriculture were basically, in terms of farming, were olive oil and wine. The grape, the vineyards and so forth. Look at what happened with Noah. The first thing he did when he got off the ark, basically, is Lindsay, would you have that?
Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard.
Okay, first thing, he plants the vineyard. So this is important kind of, effort to do back in those days. Now, before we get to the next one, Israel was also described as a vine or a vineyard. So there's a connection even with the nation of Israel.
You brought a vine out of Egypt, you drew out the nations and planted it.
You brought a vine out of Egypt. It's talking about Israel, okay? Isaiah 5:1 through, Isaiah 5:1 through 7. Go ahead and read it. I'll tell you if I have it. You got it? Yeah.
Let me sing now for my well-beloved song. Who's there? Is that correct?
Fine. Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard.
Okay. And he dug it all around, removing its stones and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. And he expected it to produce good grapes, but it only produced only worthless ones. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. For more will bear the leaf in my vineyard, but I have not done the enemy. Why would I expect it to produce good grapes? Did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall and it will become trampled ground.
Okay, you can stop there. Right? But the point is there that you see this connection with Israel, a very strong connection. He's calling. So the fact that he's turning it into water into wine has a strong connection, even the background of association with Israel. Also, wine was used in sacrifices. Okay, Numbers 15:10. Who has that?
That's me. And it is, and you shall offer for the drink offering half a hin of wine as a food offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord.
Okay, and so it's used in some of the sacrifices. this morning you're going to partake of the Lord's table, communion. What do we serve there?
Grape juice.
Grape juice, I know. But it's representative
Represent the
of
blood
what
of Christ.
would be wine, right? That's what it's supposed to functionally be. So we will have that experience this morning. And with the bread being the life of Christ, the wine being his death, basically his blood and so forth, that we partake of, that we share in his life. Psalm 4:7. Let's look at how it is used in terms of joy.
You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound.
Okay, on the grain and wine abound, associated with joy. Dearest?
In 104:15, I'm going to start in 14 because it says, you cause the grass to grow for the livestock and other things, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. So it's saying God causes the wine to grow.
Wine, what was the purpose? To gladden the heart of man. Okay. Herman Ritterboss says this: the abundance of wine motif often occurs in prophecy as characteristic for the glory of the coming kingdom of God. So we read in Isaiah 25:6.
On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, and of aged wine well refined.
Okay. And also, Bill, if you could read from Amos 9:13.
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it.
So you see this connection between wine and something glorious to come and so forth. So it has a lot of things associated with it, right? And then even in Matthew 9:17, remember John the Baptist's disciples had asked Jesus why they fasted, but Jesus did not. And John replied about new wineskins and wine, new wine. Go ahead, John.
Neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved.
Right. And so what happens if you use new wine in old wineskins? It's going to burst. It's a fermentation process. You have all this gas, kind of like, right? And so Jesus says you can't have the old system. You can't put in the new system of grace into basically this old system that you're used to. So that's what he's alluding to in this. And so this is, I think, the heart of what it is that Jesus is trying to get at as he turns the water into wine. We are now under the period of grace that has been poured out on us through Jesus' coming. And I'm not saying that, again, the law was something evil or bad, but it was basically a way to now finally move past that into what it was supposed to lead us into. Jason?
I don't know, it's what I've always thought, but wine is always sealed, right?
Wine is always sealed? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, obviously these water casks would not have been sealed.
That's good, yeah, well, I mean, in a sense,
that's gotta make you think right there. He's bringing wine to this master of the feast and an unsealed thing, and this wine's the best he's ever tasted.
But I think also it's back to your point, the fact that he didn't say, hey, bring me those old wine or the old skins that you've been filling everybody else that are empty. He said, bring me these jars. The jars that never had the stone. They've never had anything but pure water in them. He wasn't using old to put this.
And I don't think this wasn't like an accelerated process of like, we're now going to turn this into grape juice, I'm going to cause the fermentation process and all this. My personal opinion is that this was a miracle of transformation where it changed literally from water to wine, bypassed all the processes that would otherwise need to occur for it to become great tasting wine. That's what my assumption is, Jason. So I don't think they had to worry about sealing it in the sense, unless they
But
wanted.
the very fact that it's not sealed and was served in a container that it's not normally served in.
Yeah.
And it was good.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, you wonder kind of when did it come to be wine? Like when they filled it up and they saw it was still water, and then they pulled it out. It was all of a sudden wine.
I think when they were walking over, it was.
You know.
We don't know. My opinion is he turned it to wine there and then. in all of the jars.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he wouldn't need to do all the jars.
Yeah.
It would just be just one jar in particular, and they could just keep taking it out of that one. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of depth to this that correlates with the overall scheme of what we are to step into in freedom. For one thing, you have water turning into wine, which is just a transformation of the body, right? As we step into grace, we'll step into a brand new life.
Yeah.
I think there's also like a tangible side for apologetics on this too, because there's a lot of people that I've talked with that are either agnostic or atheist that do not see a tangible for sin. And so like maybe you could see water as a tangible for sin in this case as you become something better as you step into freedom of Christ.
There's a lot of allegorical things that you could say this is. I try and stay on the more simpler one where, it's just sort of where John made the comment it was used in ritual pursuit of cleaning, basically, and now it's going to now we're going to move beyond that into the period of grace. That you can come up with a whole slew of different ideas and what interpretations of it.
Well, I think one thing to think about is Moses turned water into blood, right?
Yes.
In front of Egypt, and that was to represent judgment.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I actually had to put that down. But the idea there is that whereas with Moses, turning water into blood became a judgment, right? Now it's water into wine, which is now it's going to be a blessing, you might say. Is one way to look at it. That's true. That's a good point. So it's just something to also be said that this is Jesus' first miracle that he does, right? And where does he do it? In some obscure little village town, in a wedding that nobody knows the guest names and so forth like that, who the bride and the couple are. It's not on the big stage, okay? It's just out in the backwoods village somewhere. And then it says the disciples believed. That is a key word. Remember, you could sum up John's gospel in one word, basically, and that's the word believe. What did they believe about Jesus? It doesn't say. Okay?
Yeah, that was the thing.
But I'm going to sort of make some guesses along this way because I think, we could think, did they believe him for salvation, the messiahship, as a miracle worker? It just doesn't say. And we're going to hold off really this word believe because it occurs so many times in the gospel that I don't want to just settle on it here. I want us to keep chewing on it because we're going to see various how that is used in terms of the various narratives, the stories that John develops. We will see the word believe. So I want to hold off going through that word, but I think at least they're just believing in something that he is Messiah in some way. Doesn't mean that he is the Son of God in the sense of the metaphysical Son of God. I don't know what they believe about that.
Well, in one sense, it's the beginning of them experiencing all these things that they see, but even after everything that they see, they still didn't fully understand.
Exactly true. Exactly right. So these are the ones who first get exposed to Jesus. What would we think if we were there, so to speak? We have to give them some grace. So just kind of keep chewing on that word believe. We'll be looking at it as we go through because Jesus is going to talk about it in John 3, of course, and even at the end of John 2, we're going to look at it. Okay, we're going to be having communion. I will spare the next verse for next time, okay? So I don't want to go long period on that. Any other comments, questions? Thoughts? Okay, we finished it up. Well, let's pray. Lord our God, we thank you so much for this day again.